major theme of this chapter is the imperialism. That's what we've been talking about. In fact, it's really what this chapter is mostly about, is Europeans in places like India and Java. And eventually we're going to get around to China and places like that. So why were they able to make these military advances? What was it due? Well, a lot of it had to do with the Industrial Revolution. What specific aspects of the Industrial Revolution made it? Number one, you've got access to minerals others didn't know existed. As they move into these new parts of the world, Europeans find minerals, and they've also found minerals and inventions at home. Chemists create even more powerful explosives. The most famous is dynamite. Um, everybody who's listening to this lecture has heard the name of the guy who invented dynamite, although you might not realize he did. You probably know him better for his prizes that are named after him. Nobel. Nobel in the 1800s invents dynamite, and he feels guilty because it's used for some pretty nasty stuff, so he creates the Nobel Prizes so that he will be remembered by history in a positive way. Metallurgy. Mass production. They get so good at metalworking. They produce massive guns, huge guns, and bigger ships and more portable things. We come up with more accurate hand weapons. And by this, I mean rifles, not just pistols. One of the things that they do during this time is they do something called barreling. Barreling simply is when you take the inside of the barrel of a rifle or pistol and you put a groove in it. And what that means is that as the bullet leaves the barrel of the gun, it's spinning. And that spinning action keeps it flying straight and flat. If you think of it like if you throw a football, and if you can get the football spinning with a tight spiral on it, you can get a nice spiral on the football, it will fly straighter and more even than if it's wobbling and flopping all over the place. So they do this with weapons. Machine gun becomes an effective battlefield weapon. First tested, a version of the machine gun, maybe not what you think of as a handheld machine gun, but this sort of a machine gun is first tried out during the, think about it, yep, that's right, the U.S. Civil War. First used during the U.S. Civil War. And we see improved ships, which means stronger and stronger navies. One of the groups who has an incredibly strong navy is Britain. That's why I put this picture up here. We've got England. You'll notice that it's supposed to be England as an octopus. See, it's labeled right there, England. And he's got his arm over Ireland, and I can't really read that one. Malta, Egypt, India, Canada, Cyprus, Ceylon, Gibraltar, and all these places. So it's supposed to be showing England as an imperial nation. Let's take a moment and look at this map. I think this map's sort of interesting because it shows you some of the places the Europeans controlled. You get to see the fact that Spain, once a great power in 1900, has lost a lot of its lands. Remember, we're going to talk about this when we look at Latin America, but remember, they controlled everything except Brazil. It was south of the United States and even parts of what is modern-day United States. Spain had controlled. They don't anymore. They got a few little spots here in Africa. United States, yes, we are an imperial power. We stretch across the continent. We have Alaska. We have the Philippines and Guam. And while we don't own Panama, we dominate it in 1900, or will come to dominate it. France holds large parts of Africa and out here in Vietnam. French Indochina. Notice England has got Canada, Egypt, these sections of Africa, Australia, India, Malaysia down here, Papua New Guinea. So they control a lot of the world. You've got Italy, who's got Libya, parts of Africa out here, still don't control Ethiopia. We'll talk more about that. Even some places as small as Denmark has Iceland and Greenland. Okay, Japan's starting to expand out here, so you're starting to get a feel for what things are looking like in 1900. Notice that Africa, with the exceptions of Ethiopia and Liberia over here, will be controlled by other European powers. All right, patterns of dominance. What were the tropical dependencies? We start to see things called tropical dependencies. Now, tropical dependencies mean it's near the tropics, so it means it's near the equator. This is where a small number of Europeans rule a lot of locals. And one of the places that really happens is Africa. Africa falls into this category. And maybe some areas out here in Oceania. But really, it's Africa. And these are brought under rule suddenly in the late 19th, that means the late 1800s, and the early 20th centuries. Now, how do they rule these tropical dependencies? What are they doing? Well, in some ways they follow the pattern of India, and in other ways they don't. For example, played ethnic and cultural divisions off against each other in Africa and in Southeast Asia to be able to dominate. In West and East Africa, for example, they play off the animists and the Christians versus the Muslims. There's a fear amongst these religious groups of each other, so the Europeans come in and say, well, we'll help you against the Muslims. You know, don't you want our help? They also call these people tribes. Now, I use the term dehumanizing there. What do I mean by that? What I mean is the idea that these people would not have considered themselves tribes. By calling them tribes, it makes them sound uncivilized, as if they have not advanced as much as the Europeans. And maybe technologically they're not as advanced, but trust me, these people have civilization. They have great histories and great sophistication. But one thing they have learned their lesson in India from is their education is not as pushed in Africa. In fact, where the state, by the state I mean the European governments, particularly Britain and India, had pushed and educated, actively worked to educate locals. In Africa, they don't do that. In fact, they don't educate at all. What little education is done by the church, by monks and these guys. And so there's a lack of college graduates, and therefore a lack of a middle class in these parts of the world. Lack of college graduates and a lack of middle class. We'll talk about that a little bit afterwards. There'll be parts of Africa where there are, and I mean a handful, less than 10 college graduates in the entire country. Okay? Why do they do that? I've got that under A. They're educated people in some of the other places had come back to bite them as they had used their education to work against their European colonizers. All right, one more section to go. We'll stop and take a little break. Thanks.